Hello and welcome to Starting Up and Right, Conversations with a Startup CFO. I am Trey Nicholson, your co-host. Joining me on screen is Ryan Keating, a startup CFO and your other co-host. Hey, Ryan.
Ray, how are you? Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Doing well here, doing well. Let's jump right in. Today's, if you are a founder of a hardware startup, you're in the right place today because we're going to talk about fulfillment and some of the challenges that go into growing a hardware-based startup and some of the things that you may not have thought of at this point. And Ryan, we've got a guest today, Dana Madlem, good friend of ours. And set the stage for Dana. Tell us, as a CFO, working with a hardware startup, when do you reach out to Dana or when does he reach out to you? How do you guys connect?
Yeah, good question. I mean, Dana and Rush Order have been a great partner to us for 10, maybe 15 years. And it's always the same scenario. It's an early stage company that wants to start selling products, physical products, and Rush Order comes in and fills a need even before we're needed, or simultaneously. It's such an amazing solution for what's called a 3PL, and Dana will describe that. But it's very straightforward. A hardware company has product. They need to get that product to a warehouse so it could be shipped. Somebody to handle returns, somebody to manage inventory, somebody to fulfill orders, even customer support. And when you find the right mix, and the thing I really love about working with Rush Order is they're really good at early stage companies. They're really good at getting companies onto platforms and working with Amazon fulfillment and dealing with companies that are coming in from international, wanting to start to sell in the US. And we've just enjoyed a great relationship with them for, again, well over a decade.
Well, good. Well, let's bring Dana on screen. Dana, thanks for joining, man. Welcome to the show.
Hey guys, thanks Trey. Thanks Ryan. Appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. So how'd Ryan do there? You got he tried to tee it up for you, but tell us a little bit about yourself and about Rush Order, just a high level pitch, and then we'll start digging into some hard hitting questions.
Sure. No, I think Ryan hit the nail on the head with what a 3PL is and what Rush Order provides. We're warehousing and order fulfillment. We provide those services globally. We ship across all sales channels, meaning we do e-commerce fulfillment. We ship to major retailers and practically everything in between. And my role at the company is running day-to-day operations worldwide.
Very good. Well, 3PL, what does that stand for?
Yeah, good question. Third-party logistics.
Third-party logistics.
Essentially, there's you, the seller of the product. You have a customer, and we're the third party in between that helps facilitate the movement of that product from one to the other.
Gotcha. And Ryan kind of mentioned the different inflection points where he reaches out to talk to you guys. When should a hardware startup founder reach out to a 3PL?
So I think it's sort of a stock easy answer, which is as soon as possible. Not because you're necessarily going to hire a 3PL before it's necessary, but the logistics component and frankly distribution in general is, for lack of a better description, a really expensive part of running a hardware business. It can also be more complex than most folks realize. And so working through, hey, here's where we're going to manufacture, here's where our customers are, here are some of the channels through which we think we're going to reach those customers, here's some uniqueness about the product or the type of customer experience we're trying to create. Working through those different use cases and understanding what are the cost implications involved, what are some of the things that are possible or feasible, what are some of the things that are not, that maybe you thought would be easy that aren't. Working through those things early on is generally a big help to a lot of startups, I think. And so we're often engaging with startups maybe a year or even more sometimes before they even have physical inventory to ship, just for that reason. And we're essentially kind of donating our time at that point to help out and see if we can help with their business planning.
So even a year before starting to ship the physical product, that's good to know.
Yeah, and I think, Ryan, because they're engaging with you commonly at the same time, thinking about needing a CFO to help pro forma financials, outraising money, the filling in all the numbers of the economics of the business is a big part of where we come in early, along with a CFO for hire as well.
Yeah, I know there's quite a few third-party logistic companies out there. And we work with Rush Order a lot because you tend to really understand, I don't want to say specialize, but really understand early stage companies. But what's kind of the landscape look like for third party logistics for 3PLs, and how should a company think about selecting one?
Yeah, sure. So there are literally hundreds of 3PLs in the US alone. Who knows how many worldwide, but it is a very large, very fragmented market for sure. The barrier to entry, it can be relatively low. So a couple of guys in a garage with some boxes and tape could conceivably call themselves a 3PL, right? And it goes all the way up to multi-billion-dollar companies in terms of top-line revenue and everything in between. So lots of times, each of these 3PLs have some sort of specialization, whether it's geographic or product specific. So, for example, shipping apparel is very different than shipping pharmaceuticals, and very different than shipping consumer electronics. And even within consumer electronics, maybe headphones are going to be very different than medical devices. And so lots of 3PLs have lots of different degrees of specialization.
Dana, let me ask this. I mean, I understand there's different types of 3PLs that specialize in, say, pharmaceuticals versus consumer electronics, very different probably in how they're set up, kind of how their facilities are for refrigeration, et cetera. How about size? And I'm coming from a standpoint of working with startups. An example is, say, a lot of times our startups will begin with QuickBooks Online as their accounting system. But eventually the complexity or size of their business pulls them into, say, a NetSuite or something even larger. Do you see that? How does a 3PL work with that as a company gets larger and more complex?
Yeah, I think that's very analogous. So for your typical startup that's just getting off the ground, the unfortunate reality is you actually have a huge variety of choices. Very large 3PLs will claim they can work with startups. Very small 3PLs obviously will claim they work with startups, and they do, and they probably do quite well. The challenge is then what happens in year 2, year 3 as you start to grow and really scale. Can that small 3PL scale with you? Or on the front end, that first year, can that big 3PL really give you the time and attention and effort and provide the level of flexibility maybe that you need? Because again, something unique in your business model, which is typically why you started the startup in the first place, right? Can they accommodate those things? And so we tend to focus on being usually like the first or second 3PL that a startup would hire. So we can definitely do that early stage, provide hands-on account management, et cetera. And then provide scale. And so we can do that into, maybe it's thousands of orders a day, something like that, maybe a little bit more than that. But for example, we're not going to go pitch our services to Apple tomorrow, right? Or Samsung, right? There's a whole nother level then of scale. And if you have ambitions of being that big, then there are 3PLs that can service that kind of volume as well, and including some of those really big guys out there.
Yeah, it strikes me that both Keating and Rush Order kind of serve the same market here. There's this very early stage, all the way up to a certain degree where they outgrow you guys, right? But you service them for a good long time and get it rolling in those early stage startups.
I think we find too that rarely do clients outgrow us. Usually there's an acquisition or some sort of exit that happens before that. And then the acquiring company might be one of those larger companies that already has a larger 3PL, and they say, rush who? And then it's, hopefully time to move on to the next startup, and we'll wash, rinse, repeat again. But that's usually what happens.
Yeah, that makes good sense.
We see that outcome as well sometimes with our services. Sure. So. All right. I do want to ask just, in terms of selecting the 3PL, where have you seen companies kind of make mistakes or kind of the wrong fit that they have to undo later? Kind of how should they think about that selection process?
Yeah. So first off, that word fit is really, really critical. I think startups should think about hiring a 3PL almost like looking for a partner in marriage. It is a really, really important part of your business. It's probably as strategic of a relationship as your contract manufacturer, believe it or not. It's pretty close, at least in many cases. And so I think it's really important to take it seriously, look very carefully. And carefully in that context is generally defined as like, what is this 3PL good at? Who are their other clients? What niche or what vertical and what geographies do they focus in? What is their culture? What is their style of work like? And does that mesh with what you as an entrepreneur are trying to build as a business? And along the way, of course, you can get into a lot of the tactical details like, hey, we think there's a possibility we're going to need to flash firmware on the devices in the warehouse at some point. Is that a capability that the 3PL has? Have they done it before? Can they demonstrate it happening on the warehouse floor? Some of those little tactical details can get really important as well. And so I think as part of that, I would strongly recommend if you're to hire a 3PL, 100% visit the facility, tour it, meet the people, watch orders go down the line, see how they flow through the process. Can you envision your products in that type of packaging on those types of lines being handled in such a way? And is it going to work for your business?
You made an interesting comment there, if I can kind of ask. I mean, when most people probably think of warehousing and shipping products, it's taking a box, putting a label on it and sending it out the door. But you said actually adding firmware. So you have the capability, or 3PLs have the capability of working with the electronics and adding actual updates and software?
Yeah, we do a lot of it, either on the front end when inventory arrives. Maybe it's just a designed portion of the process where we need to load firmware or software on a product. Sometimes that's less high tech, and maybe it's just adding components or accessories or quick start guides or other simple things. But a lot of times it is loading software or firmware. Other times it happens as a fire drill. It might be, hey, we've noticed that users are really struggling with the setup and configuration of the device. If only we could get this new firmware on the device before we ship, we'd enable a much better customer experience. And so we end up going through a little bit of a fire drill, pulling all the units off the shelf, flashing them, and then putting them back on the shelf and getting them ready for outbound fulfillment to customers. And then there's a third component, which is the reverse logistics piece, which is items coming back. Generally, these tend to be, in our case, fairly high value products. And maybe there's value we can recoup there in terms of, maybe a cosmetic inspection, firmware flash, functional test, a little bit of cleanup, repackaging, and make those available as warranty replacements or the VIP or PR samples, those types of things as well. Recoup some value.
So Keating and Rush Order have developed a pretty symbiotic relationship. I know that Dana, there's been occasion where you've sent some work over to Ryan. You need to talk to Ryan. Ryan, you've had startups come through the door. Oh, you need to go talk to Dana over at Rush Order. What are those two like? Dana, when do you know, or what do you see on your end? And you need to go talk to Keating and vice versa. Ryan, what do you see on your end when they need to reach out to Dana? I'm just curious about some common scenarios, I guess.
So we spend a lot of time early on in the onboarding process working with clients on how do we get orders, ship them out, how do we notify customers with tracking numbers and things that your shipment's on the way, and then how do we get the financial reporting booked back into the client's accounting system. And we see a lot of interesting approaches and interesting tools, and we tend to see a lot of, and we've having been in business for 30 plus years, see methodologies that work and those that don't. And so there are often times when a client might say, well, we've got these spreadsheets and we've got this person, or, hey, we're on QuickBooks Online, but we're scaling quickly and maybe need something more robust. And so there's usually a dialogue between us and our client about accounting systems and accounting expertise on staff that oftentimes leads to an introduction to Ryan and the team.
Fun. I know, Ryan, it probably comes up pretty often when you're doing a financial model for someone with some hardware startup aspirations, right?
Yeah, it's very, very similar kind of a trigger, just the opposite direction. We'll have clients that come to us and they've thought a lot about what they're going to sell and what their BOM is and how much they're going to, how many units they want to sell and how much they're going to spend on marketing and advertising and salespeople. But when you kind of get down to it and you ask them about this piece of shipping and fulfillment and returns, it's kind of a detail that they haven't really put into place. And as Dana mentioned earlier, you should be thinking about this even up to a year before you ship. It's not really on their list they don't know most of the time. They don't know how early they should be thinking about this or how important it is. I mean, I remember a great example that Dana gave me quite a while ago, that talking to someone like Rush Order early on can even help influence the size of the packaging. And that impacts like how many you can fit on a pallet. And if you do it the right way, you can get so much more economies in shipping. So even talking to rush order that early in the process, which again is when you're a founder and you're trying to bring a product to market, you're trying to build it. You're trying to show somebody that there's a market. You're trying to raise money to build more. Kind of the shipping and fulfillment is a little bit down your list of priorities, and it shouldn't be. So what we'll do is we'll make it top of mind and say, you've got to start these conversations. You got to get engaged with this now. As Dana said, it's an important relationship, and not one to be at the very end saying, oh, okay, we're going to go live on Amazon tomorrow. We should probably have somebody who's going to help us send these products out. So we'll see that quite a bit with early stage companies, that it just hasn't hit their radar yet, just because they haven't been through it. And we're there to help them, understand and prioritize what they need to think about.
So guys, I know we've kind of hit on it here so far, but what are some commonly overlooked or underestimated aspects of fulfillment that need to be on my mind as a startup founder? Some things I'm not thinking of.
I think from my end and what we see, two things. One is complexity. I think it's well documented and well published, and most hardware startup founders are well aware of the difficulty of building a hardware product for the first time, and the delays and the challenges there. I think what's less often as public or as well advertised is the fact that complexity does not end after the product is manufactured. So for some startups, for example, thinking about selling globally, the challenges with international shipping, for example, while it sounds like a commoditized part of the business model, it is not. And along with that are some of the surprises, or I would say underestimated costs that come with the selling and shipping hardware, whether domestically or internationally as well. Ryan mentioned a point about how many boxes can fit on the pallet, and there's actually no end to the long tail of optimizations that can happen in terms of thinking about costs and planning accordingly, and making sure that there's a profit margin to be preserved at the end of the day as a result of some of these what seem like very small decisions that in fact turn out to be very consequential for the business.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. As and I know in working with you with some of our clients, one of the things that was really underestimated or not even considered is returns. The cost of returns and dealing with returns, especially for, we tend to see in startups, people kind of pushing the cutting edge of engineering, right? Coming out with new things and trying to pack so much into a small footprint that the manufacturing is complicated. And just because it's built, once it's in the hands of the consumers, seeing those returns come back is something that I never see in a financial forecast, an estimate of cost of returns that we'll make sure people consider. But how much do you see that when you're working with startups? How much are returns factored into their cost, or do you see as a cost element?
Yeah, it's a huge driver, especially in high-tech products, because high-tech products, by definition, tend to be pretty complex, and complex things have points of failure that are sometimes not anticipated. And it comes in the way of hard cost, meaning, refunds and return shipping costs and things that are measurable, but are often underestimated for sure. If somebody plans for a 5% return rate, and there's a big difference between 5% and 15% or 25%. And of course, we have a lot of horror stories, which hopefully you as a founder are don't become one of. But the surprises with the return ratios are one thing. The other thing is the unanticipated, I would call it like a soft cost of returns, which is the customer service and support function. Somebody has to be there to answer those emails. Somebody has to be there to answer those live chat sessions, building the knowledge bases, answering questions on social media. And that infrastructure tends to be, I would say, underfunded very frequently. And it leads to two problems. One is it leads to a higher cost, number one, but number two, or higher cost than expected. But number two, it leads to a really poor customer experience when it's like, well, we can't afford to talk to customers on the phone. We can't afford live chat. We're just going to stick to email. And oh, by the way, we're going to offshore it and do it in some really cheap way. And now we've got a customer experience that doesn't quite match the supposedly premium experience of the product we're selling, right? And so that becomes a real big pain point as far as returns go as well.
And speaking of customer support, that is something that Rush Order does, right?
That's right. Yeah, for decades we've bolted on a customer support solution, but by virtue of the fact that we believe that fulfillment is really all about delivering a customer experience. And so, if somebody has a question about an order or a question about the configuration or setup of the product, that belongs in the fulfillment discussion. That's part of the order fulfillment experience. And so, yeah, we do offer a 24/7 customer support solution as well for end user facing customer support.
That's a big value. I mean, especially for a startup, the idea of not having to necessarily staff or train customer support, but to rely on a partner that's touching the product already. Is that pretty common in 3PLs, or is that somewhat unique to rush order?
Very, very unique to rush order. We got there by series of accident, and mostly being really bad at saying no to clients decades ago, in terms of helping to develop solutions for their needs. But no, so it's a pretty rare combination, especially for high tech startups. It's definitely very rare.
Well, Dana, speaking of how the scope of the services you guys provide, I've always liked hearing about the design process, packaging, and how that affects, even all the way down to the product and what's included in the package. Do you have any, I don't know, tell me an interesting story about a few examples of where you guys have really dug into the design process with a startup and helped them optimize or.
Yeah. I think anytime you're talking about logistics or order fulfillment, it comes down to weight and dimensions. And weight might seem obvious for shipping costs, right? But dimensions are also really critical, both for how many units you can fit on a pallet, how many units you can get into an ocean container or on an airplane over to your 3PL. But also then on the outbound to customers, we've had clients design products that fully packaged in a box or an envelope to a customer weigh 17 ounces, which is just over a pound. And that costs a couple dollars per unit more than had the product been designed, 1 ounce lighter, right? Similarly in Europe, when you get into half a kilo or a full kilo of a product, and other parts of the world too. And then same with dimensions. And I think a lot of startups often don't understand how shipping carriers actually bill, where they're billing for the greater of a very unique arbitrary dimensional weight calculation or the actual weight. And so centimeters or inches in box size and design, again, can lead to dollars per order difference in shipping costs. And so that's been a big pain point over the years that, again, when we're able to even sometimes 30 or 60 minutes early on, a year before, the product design process, add some input, it can make a big difference.
It'll make a huge difference. Yeah, the earlier the better. Get that sorted out, included into the design.
Yep.
Yeah. So Dana, we're sitting here still remote for the most part. Some kind of transitioning back to the office, but shipping and that last mile of shipping and COVID and how have recent events kind of affected you guys as far as clientele, client base, your own operations, your own philosophies? Any big changes?
Yeah. Yes and no. Interestingly, I'm sitting in my office at our headquarters, and I've worked every day during the pandemic from my office, and supported the folks on the warehouse floors around the world that we operate, who have been in person every day. And so, just like your grocery store workers or other frontline workers, these folks have been on site and in the office, and they don't know what remote work is actually, and to include myself in that to some degree. And so in that way, it hasn't changed. What has changed, of course, are safety protocols. And I think going back to the conversation about, finding a really strong mutual fit with a 3PL, that's a big part of it. I think you want to look at that and say, how have 3PLs navigated this, or the ones you're evaluating at least? Have they had downtime? Have they had to shut the doors of the warehouse? Those types of things. We've been extremely fortunate, knock on wood, fingers crossed, and obviously instituted a lot of different protocols and business continuity plans to ensure that we can keep the orders flowing out the door. But that has it has absorbed a very large proportion of my time the last year and a half managing our operations. And on top of that, obviously the order volume has only grown. E-commerce was already on an upswing before COVID, and we all know it's well documented that it's continued to accelerate, and we expect that trend to continue. At least we hope it does, and we're working hard to stay caught up with the volume for sure.
Okay. So Dana, you, in addition to COVID, which has been kind of more of a recent hurdle that you've dealt with. Rush order's been around, I think you said, for 30 years. Is that right? So
Right.
I'm curious, how has even kind of like the onset, you've seen a lot. So like the emergence of like Amazon and similar platforms, how has that impacted your business?
Yeah, we actually view Amazon as complementary to the business. We think of Amazon in whatever flavor our client chooses to work with Amazon as another sales channel. So there are times, just to draw an analogous example, where we're taking a bunch of units, putting them on pallets, and maybe we're shipping your product to Target or Walmart or Best Buy or whoever it may be, or Bed Bath & Beyond, on and on and on. And there are times when we take those pallets and we ship them off to Amazon, and then Amazon does the last mile fulfillment to the customer for those sales on Amazon.com. And sometimes that means Amazon is purchasing the product from our client. Sometimes that means they're using FBA, fulfillment by Amazon, to complement rush order. And so again, we're just shipping into FBA and we're replenishing FBA so that they can do the last mile fulfillment. But that would be no different than if we were shipping to any other type of channel partner, online or offline type of retailer. And so, again, Amazon has made things more complex, and they've become an 800-pound gorilla in the market for sure. But just another channel partner in our view, and complementary to the business.
All right, guys. Well, let's wrap it up. That was great. Dana, thanks for joining. One last question. I like to follow it up. Friends, family, weekends. What do you do when you're not in the office there, moving things around?
Oh, it's a really good question. Haven't been a lot of days off in the last year and a half, but when I do have them, it's hanging out with family, doing a little running, a little bike riding, trying to stay active as well.
Good. Well, thanks for joining. It's been educational. Ryan, thank you, man.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. Thanks, Dana. I really appreciate you coming on. It was an interesting conversation. I think people will find it very useful. So, and thanks, Trey.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Okay.
See you next time.
All right. Take care.
Pleasure. Thanks.